And it is just after 9 o'clock. We welcome you on a Tuesday to day 2 of the 2022 ACSA Legislative Action Days, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing Communications. Welcome. Honored to have you here on day 2 of the biggest advocacy event that ACSA puts on all year long. It's a full week of advocacy opportunities with our lawmakers, the opportunities for you to tell your stories. Edgar, how are you this morning?
Hey, I'm good, Naj. Like I said it yesterday, that intro music is better than a cup of coffee. It gets me every time. Kudos to Michael Kelly there, who does a great job with that. I'm excited to be back, Naj. It was a great day. I'll pretend I'm excited to be here with you again today. In all seriousness, it's been fun. I've seen some of the communications from our members getting out there, meeting with the legislators. So again, miss seeing folks in person, but it's been great just being able to live not only this portion of it, of us interacting with some of our policymakers, but also seeing on social media our folks engaging. And really, this is the most exciting part, that in our old traditional Leg Action Day, it was really everything was concentrated into one day. And the fact that we've seen the schedule, we have meeting throughout the week. We have folks may be tired of seeing us by the end of the week, but we have programming all throughout the week. But I love this momentum that we're taking for a number of days and really getting back to this focus that to be effective in advocacy, it needs to go beyond one day. It needs to go beyond 1 week.
Yeah.
And hopefully this is an example for the rest of the year.
Yeah. I want to say hello this morning. Michael Payne, Thomas Woodward with us, Juliana Morales, Dennis Cole with us, Lance Bradley, our great board member Maria Thompson from Region 15, Ben Churchill with us, Greg Barge from over at San Juan Unified with us this morning. So many people with us already this morning. So happy to have all of you. We mentioned social media. We'll talk about that in just a second. Let me give you the lineup that we have today, because we're going to be here talking with some of the key stakeholders for public education that are in the state capitol and have probably some of the strongest influence with what is happening here in public education. So let me just give you the lineup today. Charlie Hoffman, ACSA president, is going to join us, followed by Gina Potter, our ACSA vice president for legislative action. Senator Connie Leyva will be with us. State superintendent of public instruction Tony Thurmond will be with us. Brooks Allen, the education policy advisor to Governor Newsom and the executive director, State Board of Education, will be with us. Dr. Seud from Safe Schools for All will be here. Eileen Strauss, former vice president of the state board, Dr. Francisco Escobedo with the State Board of Education, and then our own Michael Kelly will be joined by our own Margarita Cuizon Armelino and Audney Mack to give us a little bit of insight into what's happening here at ACSA, some upcoming events and some membership opportunities. I want to mention a couple of things. For those of you who have legislative advocacy meetings, and you can take photos, go ahead and put those out there with the hashtag LAD2022. We want to see the work that you're doing, the service you're providing to your school communities. Go ahead, hashtag LAD2022. And then for you to participate in the chat function in the comment section, so many of you already are, go ahead and click on the YouTube video, and that will take you over to our YouTube page, and then you'll be able to participate on the live chat from there. Edgar, before we get to our first couple of guests, let me just have you reflect. Yesterday, we had a team of Kevin Gordon and Jack O'Connell here. Patrick O'Donnell from AD 70 was here. Kevin McCarty, assembly member from AD 7, was here. Give me your reflections from day one.
Yeah, no, it was a microcosm of frankly, some of the things that we said even beforehand, right? On one end, you had Patrick O'Donnell, who we said this to him while we were interviewing him. He was basically talking out of the ACSA, messaging points, right? He was saying everything we wanted to hear in terms of the creation of new programs, really focusing on those things that have already been enacted. I think that was music to all of our ears. My friend Kevin McCarty there, and we love to go back and forth with him. He was providing, another perspective. And I know this is something we'll talk a little bit more about, but this whole notion that when we're talking about fiscal issues, this perception that maybe there's a lot of revenues out there that what are schools talking about money? Why are there challenges on the fiscal front if they have all this money? As we talked about yesterday in our video, this is the piece that we have to counteract. I think this is why it's so important for us to go and educate the policymakers on the nuances of what's happening in schools right now. So I enjoyed the back and forth. It's actually kind of fun when we get a member that we have to challenge a little bit. But I think this is also a preview of some of what you may get, not only from our guests today, but in some of those advocacy meetings. I will say one other thing. Please don't be shy. Jump in there with the perspectives. Ask the questions of the policymakers. Even if it's not a question, just chime in and give your perspectives, whether it's one of the initiatives that they're talking about, their priorities, whether you agree or disagree. This is part of the exercise today to really get our voices out there. So just, please jump in there, join the conversation.
Yeah, join the conversation. You're invited to take part in everything that we're doing today. Deborah McLaren, Jennifer Lawson, Neri Pais is with us today, Paulette Cobb, Hillary Dito. Jump in to our chat today. Your comments are welcome onto our show. Let's go ahead and bring in our very first guest this morning, ACSA President Charlie Hoffman, joining us here in ACSA headquarters in Sacramento. Charlie, want to welcome you. Honored to have you here on the show with us today. Your reflections from day one and just everything that you think about our advocacy opportunities and how ACSA has grown with its voice over at the state capitol. Good morning to you.
Well, good morning, Nash. Good morning, Edgar. It's great to be here in the mothership and great to be here for Ledge Action Day. Thank you for having me. It's been a while since I've been on, but I am a loyal viewer. As you see, I usually sign on. Hello from Region 1 to the various broadcasts. Ledge Action Day to me is at the core of what we're doing at ACSA. And I would, to all your viewers, I would say thanks for participating in it. You're not along for the ride. You're living the work of ACSA. In the last year, it's been a little unusual here at ACSA with Wes Smith going back into the superintendency. We've had an opportunity to have over 50 focus groups, survey all the membership. When we're asking the membership what we want from our new executive director, but part of that conversation has been, what do you want from ACSA? And what we hear resoundingly from our membership, we want legislative advocacy, we want professional development, and we want networking opportunities. Over and over again, we hear that. Earlier in the year, we were updating our strategic plan. And part of updating the strategic plan is talking to the membership and focus groups and subcommittees. And again, what do you want from ACSA? Legislative advocacy, professional development, networking. Okay, legislative advocacy is at the forefront of why our members pay their dues and want to be members. When I talk with you guys, the professionals at legislative advocacy, and your team, what we hear from you over and over again over my years with ACSA is grassroots relationships with legislators. And that means you all, the membership, us, we have to go out and talk with our legislators and build those relationships. And the best time to build a relationship is not in the middle of a crisis, not when you're going hat in hand asking for something, but just to get to know one another. And so that's what is handed to us. I've always felt as a Region 1 representative, when we have Ledge Action Days, this week, Ledge Action Week, we may be able to change the acronym from LAD to LAW, which I think would be beautiful. But you hand us this opportunity to go out and build those relationships while we're supported by you all coaching us, not holding our hands, but certainly coaching us, providing the specific time where we can come together and then go and chat with our legislators and start to build those relationships. And so I guess what I would say to everyone participating in Ledge Action Week this week, you're doing the core work of ACSA. What our members want is ledge advocacy. And ledge advocacy is dependent on our relationships at the local level with our local legislators. And so this is just a great opportunity to do that. And I've always found it enjoyable. Quick story from my own involvement with Ledge Action Days over the last 10 or 12 years, built a relationship with our assembly member from far Northern California, Shasta County, who's now a state senator and has now announced a candidacy for governor, Brian Dowley. I got a call from his office a couple of years ago, said, we'd like to come and visit your regional occupational center and even come visit your Rotary Club. I had just been Rotary president, and wow, great. Neat to have this relationship. Always pleased to show off our ROP, our campus, our center. And he did. He came with a small team. We took some pictures and toured. He talked with some kids, talked with some teachers. He's an ag guy, so he was very into the career technical education. Went from there to the Rotary Club. He gave a very nice presentation at our Rotary Club. And then and I just thought, wow, this is great. He wants to be out there. He wants to get to know people. And he called me because we had that relationship really that came from ACSA Ledge Action Days. And then about a half hour later, he did a significant press conference where he announced he was running for state senator. And now he's the state senator from our area and running for governor. But that he came to our little regional occupational center into my little Rotary Club to set up his political action candidacy wave to transition into a state senatorship was, I thought, pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that all came out of this ACSA's Ledge Action Days.
Yeah, that certainly expresses the power that our members have, the strength of Legislative Action Days week.
Charlie's getting into he's saying controversial things, changing the acronym. We know how that mess up social media and whatnot, but I love the sentiment there that yes, I think in all seriousness, what Charlie said, I think goes to this point that he's been driving home, that the grassroots advocacy does need to go beyond the day, beyond the week, that the story that he told, right? It's using a connection and then having it that manifest in other ways, I think is the power of us having this event.
Yeah, absolutely. ACSA President Charlie Hoffman. Charlie, so good to have you here this morning. Honored to have you with us. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Man, it's great to see you. Thanks for having me. Back to work. We have an exciting week of ACSA board work, interviewing candidates for our new executive directorship this week. So exciting big week for your ACSA state board.
Thank you, Charlie, very much. Good to see you. Edgar, we're going to bring in our next guest in just a moment. I want to point out two things. First, and we'll ask Gina Potter about this. Word is yesterday that there were more than 70 meetings with lawmakers scheduled for our members over this week, which is an incredible number, especially when you consider that was a struggle to get 70 meetings in a day and a half, 2 days for when we have Legislative Action Day here in person at the state capitol. So to hear 70 meetings is incredible. And word is that our first lawmaker is actually currently meeting with our members right now. So that's the power of this, that we're having our members meet with Senator Connie Leyva right now, and she'll be joining us in a matter of minutes. So I'm looking forward to hearing what our members were able to do during that meeting. So Edgar, let's go ahead and bring in our next guest right now. Gina Potter is the superintendent from San Ysidro Elementary School District down near the border, and our ACSA vice president for legislative action. Gina, we'll bring you in this morning. Good morning to you. You joined us first thing yesterday as we kicked off our Legislative Action Day, Legislative Action Week. As I mentioned, more than 70 meetings for our members with lawmakers. It's a great way to kick off the event. Gina, good morning. So happy to have you back with us today.
Oh, good morning, Naj. It's fantastic to be here this morning. What an exciting time for ACSA to be engaged in this advocacy work that happens here in Sacramento. I wanted to welcome everyone back to our second exciting day of ACSA's 42nd Annual Legislative Action Days event. ACSA's governmental relations team, under the leadership of Dr. Edgar Zesueta, has invited several key state leaders to join us today. And we're sincerely thankful to our state representatives for being here and for the critical leadership roles that they serve to provide our 6 million California students with a high quality education. Our VPLA region leaders have done a remarkable job scheduling and coordinating regional teams to meet throughout this week with those key state leaders and their staff from the Senate and the Assembly. I mean, the fact that as of yesterday, we're meeting with well over half of all of the senators and assembly members in the capital of California is truly remarkable for ACSA's work this week. And I couldn't be more proud of ACSA and of our ACSA members for participating in this event, and also of our VPLA region leaders for making that happen. Truly a remarkable, momentous event for ACSA this week. Indeed, we extend our gratitude to our VPLA region leaders for their dedicated leadership and their advocacy. And then you might want to know, well, what are they going to be talking about when they meet with these senators and assembly members here in California? What are we asking for in terms of being educational leaders and truly representing over 17,000 educational leaders in over 1,000 school districts in the state of California? Well, what does that look like in the middle of COVID transitioning from a pandemic to an endemic? And, here are our big key hot topics in education today. And this is what's so important for the children that we serve and the education that we provide to them. That first topic is really boosting core funding for investments in education. And what does that mean? We've really decided if that California Constitution is asking us to meet and be in the top 10 funded education systems in the state of California, is there a time? Do we have an opportunity to inch our way towards that? And what does that look like? Well, that looks like a greater investment in the LCFF-based funding. And that's critically important for education and for the students that we serve. We also ask that our legislatures keenly be aware that COVID has had a devastating impact on student attendance. And it's been very difficult for our students to engage in that work while they're sick and trying to recover with COVID, or they have family members with COVID, in the independent study work. So we ask, please, could you please provide our districts with some COVID attendance relief? Because what happened this year is something that was out of our control. So, please, whatever you could do to provide us some COVID attendance relief, that is so important. Broaden those independent study flexibility provisions, help us pay down that unfunded pension liabilities, help to remove the obstacles to truly implementing and growing the Universal Transitional Kindergarten program, and designate and allocate non-Prop 98 facilities funding so that our schools don't look like they're crumbling, right? We need to modernize and advance our school buildings. And finally, let us return educators back to educating. And what does that look like? That looks like limiting health mandates for school enforcement. Let our health sector take care of those health sector mandates, and let us educators go back to what we do best, what we've been trained to do, which is to teach our children and to provide them with an excellent academic education. So in closing, I just wanted to say, thank you to each of you and our ACSA members. We have 437 of you attending ACSA's Legislative Action Week this week. It's the highest number that we've ever had in the history of ACSA for this event. And we want to say thank you for your valuable time to advocate on behalf of education. And thank you for dedicating your careers to the success of California students. You've dedicated your life to the children of our state. And we say, as ACSA, thank you. Thank you for that humanitarian work you do each and every day as educational leaders in our great state of California.
Gina, beautifully said. I mean, I think not only did you summarize our points for the week, but I love this note you ended on in terms of expressing gratitude to our leaders, to the folks that make up this organization. And that gets me to reflect to something you talked about yesterday. But I'm astonished. I'm astonished even as I see the chat now, or I look at the work that's happening, that this work is all done by our educational leaders. You know, this event is really led by our vice presidents of legislative action, who on top of their full-time job, on top of all the challenges that they're facing this year, are finding time to organize their regions. I know you have a great VPLA there in Dr. Churchill down in your region. And I know he epitomizes the work that's happening across the state. So just again, a big thank you to those folks. And I know you know firsthand, because you've been in that position, you've had to bring folks together. But I'm just really astonished by the amount of work that's been put forth by our leaders across the state.
Beautifully said, Edgar. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, a deep sense of gratitude to our ACSA members for taking the time this week to really lift up the voice of education and do what's right for children, do what's right for our students in California. Thank you, everyone.
And Gina, thank you so much for your leadership during your time here as VPLA, getting all of this set up. It's amazing to see the advocacy that our members were able to do yesterday, what they're planning to do today, the fact that we have literally just had our members meeting with the senator who's coming up with us in a couple of moments. This is great. So thank you, Gina, for your leadership through this process. Gina Potter, ACSA, Vice President for Legislative Action and the Superintendent from San Ysidro Elementary School District down by the border. Gina, thank you so much. Let me, as we're waiting for the senator to jump on, Edgar, I want to make this point because as I'm looking over at the chat this morning, want to say hello to Jessica Riley. Give me a moment here. Victor Garnica, Christina Crane. I'm seeing so many names. Laura Vieira, Lola Skelton. I'm seeing so many names here in the comment section. Individuals who I'm literally meeting for the very first time here in the comment section. One, it speaks to the power of this event, but two, the participation. We've seen growth so much in the participation from our members over this time. It's so impactful to be able to see this. You and I are on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. on our ACSA legislative lunch break. And again, I'm seeing so many names on here that we don't normally get to see. It's really powerful. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, I agree. I you know, Naj, because you're a pro, I knew you were going to bring it back to get us some more viewers there on Wednesdays. I thought that's where you're going, but I love seeing the new names. I love seeing the expansion of folks that have maybe participated in ACSA, maybe ACSA members, but it's their first time coming to Ledge Action Day, whether it be virtual. And this is one thing that I think has been a theme of all of our programming, of all of our new programs at ACSA, that the pandemic forced us to pivot, right? The pandemic forced us to do things differently in order to still serve our members. I think the key now is, even as we hopefully go into this endemic stage where we're getting back to in-person events, where we're going to have this in-person event next year, how do we still keep this momentum? How do we bring in more folks? How do we bring in new folks that maybe haven't participated in this event? So I'm always excited to see some of those new names.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, here's what we're going to do. We are going to take a little bit of a break here, but don't go very far away from your computer from our broadcast. Senator Connie Leyva from Senate District 20, the chair of the Senate Education Committee, is going to join us just on the other side of this break. So stay right where you are. We will come back in just a moment. You are watching day 2 of the 2022 ACSA Legislative Action Days. And welcome back. Day 2 of the 2022 ACSA Legislative Action Days, along with Edgar Zazweta. I'm Naj Alakan, and we are honored today to be joined by Senator Connie Leyva from Senate District 20, the chair of the Senate Education Committee. If I believe correctly, Senator Leyva, this is your second year with us here at Legislative Action Day. So honored to have you with us. Given that you're departing the legislature, take a moment to reflect on your experience and talk to us about some of the work that you're most proud of.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me again. I really appreciate all the work that ACSA does. Edgar, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Yes.
Glad you're well. I think when people ask me what I liked most about the job, I would say it's the people I've had the opportunity to meet and the organizations I've had to work with, gotten to work with. But as far as legislation, we've had 50 bills signed into law from the governor, and oh my goodness, they're just from education to public safety to the environment. I would say probably the environmental bills and some of the women's legislation I've done, I'm really the most proud of. Some of that stuff has never been done before and was never even attempted. And I think we did some work that really did change people's lives. I mean, I can go bill by bill, but I don't want to bore you. So I would say the environmental work and the work on women's issues.
Connie Leyva, and I don't say this to every member, but one of my favorite members of the legislature, sincerely. So,
I know that.
Good to see you, and thank you again for making time for us and with our members today. You know what? Obviously, one of the themes this week we've been talking about is the fact that we're going to have some changes next year in terms of your leadership there on the Senate Education Committee, your counterpart in the Assembly. But with that said, your time is not done, right? And you're going to definitely hear from us here with the remaining months in the legislature. So Naj asked about looking back. Now look forward. What is some of the maybe unmet work, the work that still needs to be done? How do you want to utilize the time you have left in the legislature? What are some of your priorities here for the rest of the legislative year?
So you're right. I keep telling people I'm leaving, but I'm not gone yet. We've got the whole rest of the year. We have a very full bill package on Team Leyva. And being the chair of education, I feel so lucky because in the Senate, we have K through 12 and higher ed, where it's a little different in the Assembly. So not only do I get to author legislation, we get to look at education bills and make sure, in conjunction with all of you and other stakeholders, making sure that these bills are actually something that's going to be helpful. I learned about unfunded mandates my first year here, so I always try to make sure we don't do anything with an unfunded mandate. This year, we are probably the two biggest priorities for me are looking at transportation. How do we make sure we can get our kids to and from school? I'm co-authoring a bill with Senator Skinner, passed out of Education Committee last week. And then also funding. I mean, funding is always a huge issue when it comes to education. We have a lot of money in the budget, but how do we spend it? How do we spend it wisely? I was of the thought at first that we needed to switch from ADA to enrollment-based funding. But the more I look at it and the more I talk to folks, it's probably not the best way to go. I think the governor's 3-year rolling average with some tweaks could be helpful and could be the way to go. So we'll be working on that and hearing from all of you on what will be most helpful. But I would say funding's always a huge issue and there's never enough. Schools always need more. So we need to get it right for all of you.
Want to remind all of our viewers participating here on Legislative Action Day, if you have a question or a comment for Senator Leyva, go ahead and put that into our chat. I want to ask you, Senator, about advocacy, because I know that you just got out of a meeting with our members before you were able to join us. Based on what you hear from your constituents, from education partners statewide, what do you believe are the biggest issues? What were some of the things that you talked to our members about, and what are some of the biggest issues facing schools right now, and what can the state do to support schools?
So I think the state, when it comes to education, we should be like doctors and say, first, do no harm. So we want to make sure we're doing things that are actually helpful. Talking to your members and your folks just before I got on here, a lot of it was about TK and making sure that the schools are ready for transitional kindergarten. I will be candid with you, when the governor was working on that last year, I had my concerns because I know most of the schools, the vast majority of the schools in my district aren't set up. The elementary schools aren't set up to welcome transitional kindergartners, our little 4-year-olds. They don't have the little potties. They don't have the even sometimes just the room. So we were just talking about how do we make sure we fund that? How do we make sure that they have what they need? And then one of the women who was speaking, she said that they are doing it, but can we include them in ADA so that they're getting funded for it? What a great idea. And it's little snippets like that that help me be better at my job. So I love meeting with our school districts up and down the state, especially in my district, so I can hear what's actually going on and what we're doing, if we're helping you or if we're hurting you. I also know that school start time is going to be a challenge for our schools.
Senator, you've been great on those issues, and I'm sure that's music to some of our members' ears on that TK issue. I know that there's a subset of districts there that are struggling with implementing the program, even though they don't have dedicated funding for it. Switching gears a little bit, I'm going to throw a bit of a controversial issue on it, but you're used to this. You can handle it.
That's right.
It arguably one of the most contentious issues, or the issues that's getting the most highlights this year in the legislature across all topics, is these issues about the mitigation efforts around COVID, namely the vaccines.
Yes.
You, not only in this debate, but years ago when we had the original debate about personal belief exemptions, I think you were on record expressing some concerns about maybe some of the unintended consequences of being too aggressive on that front. I mean, specifically what it would mean for working families who wouldn't maybe have the option, or for independent study or virtual education. Talk to us about that in the context of what's happening now. I know it's probably the question we get most. What's happening with the vaccine bills? What do you think is going to happen? Give us your perspective.
Absolutely. So, I am fully vaccinated. I am boosted. I believe in the vaccine 100%. But I also have seen what has happened over the last couple years. I have been to school board meetings, and they have been just crazy. I have the utmost respect for our school board members who have really been through the fire with some of these parents who do not want to vaccinate their children, the teachers who do not want to get vaccinated. I would love to see everyone get vaccinated. I think it's the right thing to do. But what I also think right now is we've all been through a lot in society, and we're very polarized on this issue. We have got to find a way to come back together. We have got to find a way to work as a community again. And I think having a vaccine mandate, while I said, I think everyone should be vaccinated, I don't think that's the right thing right now. And I think we have to find a way to make sure that our kids can come back, our teachers can come back that aren't vaccinated, and we're all working together and keeping everyone safe. I know my own school district, Chino Valley, I was told, I don't know this for sure, but this is what I was told, that 50% of the support staff, meaning the CSEA workers, are not vaccinated. I don't think that a vaccine mandate is going to force all of them to get vaccinated. Let's say 25% get vaccinated so they can keep their jobs. 25% leave. We don't have a bench to bring people in to make sure our schools are running. Teachers who aren't going to get vaccinated. We don't have a bench to bring in more teachers to teach our children. So I think right now the vaccine mandate would do more harm than it would good. And I think we need to just find a better way. So I am personally, and I've told Dr. Pan, I am not in support of SB 871. It's just not the right time.
Senator, you mentioned school start, and that has lit up the comment section. I ask for comments, and you say school start, and then we start getting all kinds of comments. I have one from Paulette Cobb. Yes, school start time is a challenge for many. Jessica Riley put in transportation is a huge issue in rural districts in South Monterey County, especially when serving students with special needs. Christy put in something, agreed on school start time. Geographic isolation creates challenges on start time. Let me just ask about some of those challenges, because you mentioned school start time. As you've been reviewing some of the tenets of this legislation, what are the challenges that you see with respect to school start time?
Well, first, let me be very clear that I did not support schools changing school start time. I thought it was a bad idea from the get-go. I worry about our youngest learners putting a kindergartner and a first grader out there at 6 a.m. to catch the bus. To me, we're trading one problem for another. And so transportation was a huge issue. We had folks testify in committee that we don't know how we're going to do this because we have to shuffle and change all of our school start times for all of the, K through 12. So my hope is that this transportation bill that Senator Skinner and I are working on will help with a little of that. But I'm still very concerned. I'm very concerned that we are, like I said, we are maybe helping one group and foregoing another group. I worry about our youngest learners, our youngest kids being out there waiting for the bus when it's still dark. So I think it's going to be a challenge. And if there's anything you all think I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask me.
Senator, one more question from me. I asked Assemblyman O'Donnell this yesterday, and I'd be curious of your thoughts. One of the things we've been talking about all week is the tremendous amount of changes that are going to be in the legislature next year. We have unprecedented turnover, and namely in our education world, we're losing both of the education chairs. Given that there will be somebody in your seat come next year, what advice would you give them? What have you learned? And you talked a little bit about this, about the mandates and whatnot.
Yes.
But, what piece of advice would you give them? And then lastly, what advice would you give our members in terms of them now having to do some education to a lot of new policymakers, right? Who may not be experts in this arena. So one, your predecessor or your successor, I should say, and then two, to our members, what advice would you provide?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, let me just say I am going to miss chairing education dearly. I have loved it and it's been such an honor, but it's time for me to go back home. But I will miss it. And I am thinking about who the successor should be, because I want someone who is as passionate about education as I am. And my advice would be, just always look at the policy. People always say, oh, it must be so hard being the chair of Senate Education because, you've got all these competing interests. And I said, that is true. But if you just look at and focus on, is this good policy? Sometimes you're going to have to tell people this isn't good policy and you might disappoint your friends. But if you always focus on that, I think that it makes it a lot easier and people understand that. Don't play politics. Don't look at a bill and say, oh, I like this person. I don't like this person. This person might harm one of my bills down the way. No, just look at the policy aspect and is this going to be helpful to our students and to our school districts? And I think that makes it much easier to do my job. And then the other question for advocacy, oh my gosh, you guys don't ever stop advocating. It is so helpful and so important to hear from all of you who are boots on the ground. We sometimes think we have these great ideas up here in Sacramento, and sometimes we do, but hearing from all of you who actually do the work every day is incredibly important. Contact our district offices, contact us up here. Now we can Zoom us. We're starting to have more people come to the Capitol, come and meet with us in the Capitol. But you have to continue. I learned this from being in the labor movement for 20 years. You have to keep advocating, or what is important to you will get swept under the carpet. So don't ever be afraid to come and talk to us and tell us how what we're doing up here is actually affecting you on the ground.
Connie, I lied. I'm going to ask you another question. I had a question.
Oh, good.
We got a question from Greg asking about an issue I've heard you talk about the need for resources, especially on the social emotional level.
Yes.
Given the trauma that families and students, and we also think about when we're thinking about mental health, we think about it at the highest grade levels in high school. But Greg actually makes the point that we need this especially at the elementary level, that we're seeing some of these issues pop up with younger and younger students. Your perspective on that, do you think there's some opportunities for investment on whether it be mental health, social emotional supports for schools?
Yes. This has been social emotional trauma informed learning has been on our radar for probably for the 2 years prior to the pandemic. And now coming out of the pandemic, it is at the top of the list. There are a number of bills working their way through both houses that talk about funding, making sure we have folks at the school level. And I absolutely believe in my heart that the most important place is with our elementary school age students, because if we start there, then hopefully when they progress on, they get to high school, they're in a better space. Don't get me wrong, we have to definitely help our high school students. But I think what I have always wanted to see, and this was something I wanted to do before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, was like a student's bill of rights. And that bill of rights for me would have included a mental health care professional at every campus, at least one, because some of our high school campuses are quite large. So we probably would need two, maybe even three. Of course, it's a funding issue. But what I always say is, don't tell me what your priorities are. Show me where you put your money, and I'll tell you where your priorities are. So if these students really are our priority, then we have to make sure that there is a mental health professional on every campus, if not more. And we need school nurses on every campus. So we're working towards those things. And even when I'm gone, I will still be advocating for that, because I just think it's critically important.
Senator, we have a question that's coming from Carrot, and this goes into a bit of an advocacy question.
Okay.
Carrot asks, school start times affects parents and their ability to work. We need time for the employers to embrace the change in policy. Why are we not engaging the larger community before passing legislation? I'm just going to go ahead and bring my own perspective into this. I have a wife who's an elementary school teacher. I have two daughters that are in high school. And with this school start time legislation, it's going to completely change how things have to move around with elementary school schedules and with high school schedules, and just even the busing that's going on for transporting the students. Is there a challenge for educators, for lawmakers, for the general public to really kind of come together and have that discussion about important legislation like this?
Well, it should be. And all of the points that you make are the points that I made when the bill was working its way through my committee, that we weren't looking at. I didn't feel that the author was thinking about all of the things that you just talked about. Sometimes our children grow up. My girls are now 30 and doing their own thing, married with children. But I remember what it was like trying to get them to school. And my husband and I figure out who's going to take them, who's going to pick them up. And so those were all the things I was thinking of when this bill was working its way through. And I just thought, my God, this is going to be incredibly challenging on our working parents. I think that if you're one of those parents, the very, very few who don't have to work, it doesn't matter when school starts, because you can pick your kids up at any time. But I also think about our schools are going to have to adapt. I have been a big proponent of after school care and have worked on making sure we have enough funding for that. Well, now we're probably going to have to work on before school funding, because parents are still going to have to get to work, and many of them are not going to have bosses that say, oh, I understand there was a bill that passed and now your child can't go to school until a certain time. We're going to have people there to take care of these children so mom and dad can get to work on time. I just think it's going to be incredibly challenging. I've thought that from day one. And we should have had more of a discussion.
No, you bet. And I'll give you credit there. You, from day one, you have been one of those champions. A tough issue. It was a tough issue politically. I know there was a large coalition, and we'll have to continue to try to drive that issue home, even the remainder of this year and moving into the future. I think I may be telling the truth this time. One more question. One issue you alluded to at the beginning, and it's frankly one of our priorities, is having some grace and some flexibility given the attendance struggles that schools had, to no fault of their own, right? I think this was epitomized by what happened in January. I think we could venture to say it was probably the worst attendance month maybe ever, just because of what was happening with the Omicron surge, right? And trying to keep schools open. I know the governor proposed that. I know ACSA has been working on some alternatives. Generally speaking, what would you say? Is there the appetite to make some of these changes that would really take into account that this has not been a normal year, and using the data that we have this year doesn't make sense?
Yes, I think there's definitely the appetite, because I've heard so many people talk about it, and so many, we just get it. And I think that's the other thing that we can't ever lose sight of. whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, whether your child is vaccinated or not vaccinated, parents are afraid. My children aren't little. I don't know how I would feel if I had a second grader sending them back to school, a third grader, a fifth grader. So parents have kept their children home, which is to the detriment of funding for our schools. So I like your word, Edgar. Grace. We need to show a little grace, and just we may make some decisions that this is our first pandemic. None of us have lived through a pandemic. Our first goal has been to keep everybody as safe as we can possibly keep them. And now that we're coming out of it, there's some things we're going to have to work on to make sure our schools get back up and running to where they need to be, make sure parents feel safe and comfortable sending their children back to school. So we all need a little grace, and we all need to realize that it might not be a perfect solution, but it also might be a solution that works right now, and we might need to change it in a year or two. So we also need to be flexible, but I definitely think there's an appetite to make sure we are funding you properly this year.
Senator Connie Leyva, Senate District 20, the chair of the Senate Education Committee. Senator Leyva, it's been an honor to have you here on the show. Thank you so much for your work. Just because you're, leaving the Capitol doesn't mean we're not going to bring you on just because we want to bring you on. So just
Anytime.
be prepared for that.
Anytime.
And like you said, she's not gone yet. So I'm sure this is not the last time we've heard from her here.
That's exactly right. I've got
We
a number of months left.
We should put her on the calendar for a Wednesday. Hey, thank you, Senator, very
you.
much. Have a great rest of the day.
I have good work.
Thank you. Hey, I have to tell you, Edgar, and I know we're going to go to a break. Senator Leyva comes on, and the comment section lights up with agreement about things she's talking about, whether it's the subject matter or the legislation, and then our participants here having discussions together about important issues, the school start time. We talked about counseling. We talked about mental health. It's great. This is what this Legislative Action Day is all about: is this collaboration, this advocacy. It's been great to see it.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I take solace in that, and we didn't prep these members. There's not like we told them what to say. We're asking them questions. They're giving their perspectives. But I think it's a testament that folks have already been engaging with their legislators, right? That these policymakers have already heard from their constituents. They've been talking to their school officials. And I think it's some of the reason that you're hearing some of the themes that we're frankly advocating for. They're already bringing them up, even in response to our questions. So I think that's a really good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks, 3-minute break. 3-minute break. And then when we come back, ACSA's Michael Kelly, ACSA's Margarita Cuisan Armelino, ACSA's Adne Mack will join us here on the Legislative Action Days. You are watching day 2 of the 2022 Legislative Action Days. 3 minutes and we'll be back.
little after 9:55 on this Tuesday morning. Welcome back. Michael Kelly, good to be with all of you for day 2 of our ACSA Legislative Action Days, or if Charlie Hoffman gets his way, Legislative Action Week, in which we would have to do a whole lot of marketing changes. So I think for now we'll stick with LAD. I will say this, I'm really excited about our next guest, and that would be Margie Cuisin-Armelino and Adne Mack. Margie, probably tweeting, because she's really, really good at it. Better than almost anyone I've ever seen. Margie, were you getting a quick tweet in right before we went on?
I was actually taking a picture so that I can tweet. Yeah, a little bit later. Exactly. In fact,
if you don't follow, I want to promote. I was just gonna say, I want to promote you on Twitter. What's the Twitter handle, Margie?
It's at Margie ACSA.
There you go. Follow her as fast as you can. Margie ACSA. It's really simple. She is all over the state when it comes to supporting our members. And so if you want to see everything that's going on, in addition to the ACSA Twitter page, which is ACSA_info, Margie's a great follow. Adne, you're a great follow too, man. It's not that we're leaving you out at all. So much to discuss on this Tuesday morning, because I know that the two of you have been quite busy. Adne, let's start with you. Man, oh man, have you gone into just so much work when it comes to putting 2 really, really big conferences together, the equity event that's going to be held at the end of the month, and then an LGBTQ event. For the people who don't know and might want some more information, fill us in on what those events look like.
Oh man, Michael, I'm really excited. We're coming back in 2022. We took a gap year with COVID. So we're coming back with Equity Institute. It's going to be April 28th and 29th at the Hilton in Pasadena. We're going to have some great speakers. We're going to have Tyson Amir. For those of you that saw him at the Leadership Summit during the Equity Luncheon, he's going to come back and do some of his work, some of his rhyming, his poetry, as well as teach us some lessons. We're going to have Dr. Toll, who is from UC Davis. She's the first Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Vice Chancellor, I believe is her title. We're looking forward to hearing from her. We're also going to hear from some of our county superintendents and how they're implementing equity in their school districts, in their county, and how they're assisting with that and what strategies they're using. And so we're really looking forward to that during the last week of April. But on top of that, one of the best things that we have this year, we're going to end sort of our equity PD this year with our inaugural LGBTQ conference, aka the Pride Summit. That's going to be in Seaside and near San Diego. We're really looking forward to having some great dialogue around LGBTQ leadership, serving the students, supporting our leaders, and bringing our community together to really dialogue around how we can support our students and our families that identify as gay or transgender. We're looking this is going to be exciting because it's our inaugural event. And so we're hoping to make this a mainstay at ACSA moving forward.
And on that note, Adne, I'm really excited about the keynote speaker you have for the Lead with Pride event. I know that Gianna Miller and I will get a chance to talk to her down in Seaside. Can we tell the good people who are watching this who the big keynote speaker is?
Please tell them.
Go ahead. No, this is your stage, man, not mine.
We're having a Jeopardy winner, the first transgender winner of Jeopardy as the keynote speaker. Amy, oh gosh, you got me because my head went blank. I'm so excited.
It's Amy Schneider.
Amy Schneider, that's what it was. Yes, I had the first name and I couldn't think of the last name.
Yeah.
Amy Schneider is going to be joining us and presenting. We're really excited about this because given that she won Jeopardy, she's just now getting on the speaking circuit, and we're going to be one of the first organizations to have her speaking to us. And so to have someone represent the transgender community who is showing a level of success, speak to our students, speak to our leaders, and share her story is going to be incredible for us. And so we're just really looking forward to having her there, having our members hear from her. I think this is going to be an incredible experience. And just another thing that ACSA is moving forward with, supporting our members in this way.
Margie, let's turn to you. I just remember there were so many conversations when the pandemic hit in March of 2020 about what would this mean for membership, and the job that you have done over the course of the last 2 years is nothing short of extraordinary. Can you just sum up what the last 2 years have been like for you in terms of keeping this ACSA family together?
Really just absolutely crazy, exhausting, but at the same time, very fulfilling because, we're providing benefits and services that are of value to our members, especially right now. And I can't stress enough how much ACSA membership is really necessary for all school administrators, especially right now. I mean, if you need ACSA, you need it now. I can't say that enough. And I say that because there's so much craziness happening right now. And so we've got strikes happening at certain school districts. One of the benefits that we don't talk about a lot, we know some of the big three, right? So we know professional development, we know networking, and we know advocacy. Those are some of the things that we, lean on when we sell membership. But other things that we don't talk about include strike preparation. And that, that comes with training through our strike manual, helping school districts prepare for, teacher strikes. It also includes outreach to our retirees so that they can help fill, subs and fill interim positions that might be available. The other benefit that people don't really use a lot is mentoring. And I can't stress enough again, I also oversee the legal division. And so sometimes these cases come across my desk and I just think to myself, if that person had gotten the right mentoring, we wouldn't need the legal services. And so, just a couple of things to remind people that these are other benefits that come with your membership that is extremely helpful with your successful career. So, again, if you are, folks listening in this room are all members. And so, but colleagues who are not. And so you want to make sure that you're reaching out to them. And membership is only $2 a day. You can't even make a phone call or buy a cup of coffee for $2. And so why not invest that in your own career and your own success? And so that's what I would encourage everyone who's listening right now. Find a friend who isn't an ACSA member and bring them in. It's the best thing you can do for your friend.
Just be a good friend. That's all we're saying here, right? If you are
a
truly a good friend, then you will recruit somebody to
ACSA.
join our association. It's really simple because the reality is we hear time and time again when we speak to our members, the job of an administrator can be a lonely, lonely profession. And so why not be surrounded by 17,000 strong and join the ACSA family? All of you who are watching this broadcast right now, you know it. We know it. Having worked for ACSA, I'm the baby compared to the two of you when it comes to experience with ACSA. I'm at 7 years. Y'all have a little bit more than I do and then some. But that's okay. I'll catch y'all one day. That said, we talk about the family and the need to keep the family together. And Margie, you have done that in spades. Also, a little birdie told me huge membership get for you down in LAUSD, from what I hear.
That's right. That's right. So shout out to Region 16 leaders. They put on an amazing event for about 200 of their school administrators. The superintendent, Alberto Carvalho, showed up, gave a wonderful keynote speech. He was very motivating, very inspirational. And at the end of the night, we grabbed him and asked him to join ACSA, and he did. And so, he's the first LA Unified superintendent who isn't an interim that joined ACSA. So we're very proud of that. So that's kind of a coup for the membership department. So shout out to Alice Petrosian, to Muhaid Cho, to Lisa Doxer-Nellis, and some of the Region 16 leaders for making that happen.
History in
Bravo.
the making at ACSA right now, and all thanks to the good work of Margie and her team. That's really impressive. I know that Naj had a chance to speak with LAUSD Superintendent Carvalho a couple months ago, and just outstanding hire for LAUSD. So I'm hoping that partnership with LAUSD and with Region 16 can continue to grow for years to come. Margie, you kind of gave the elevator pitch for why you should join ACSA. The question I always enjoy asking members is, what would your life be like without ACSA? So to wrap this up, if I gave you 30 seconds to give an elevator pitch, one last pitch to why people should join ACSA, what would that be?
I would say, ACSA is an extension of your career. And so if you really want to be good at what you do, you have to belong to an organization that can give you the tools and resources necessary to become that. And if you're already good at what you're doing, you need to make sure that you're getting the right kind of training, the updates, all of the information about legislation, and making the right contacts in the profession to elevate yourself even further. There's always room for growth. Right. And so whether you're a new administrator or a seasoned administrator, you need a professional organization to help continue your growth and your ability to lead even better. So I would say that there's never not the right moment for someone to be an ACSA member, for a school administrator to be an ACSA member.
And Adne, how many years for you now as equity director?
This is how long we had COVID, 2.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. 2 years.
Yeah.
When you look at kind of the next steps beyond the equity event at the end of the month, and then the Lead with Pride, and I don't want to get too complicated with this, but what's the vision for what equity can look like, and growing the department even more, and the role that you have in the next couple of years?
So I think in the next few years, I think what you're going to see me really try to accomplish is looking at how we can support our leaders, sort of at a local level with, and it's perfect that this is Ledge Action Day, is supporting with some of these political issues that are coming up that are focused around equity. And so when I look at things like critical race theory, and hearing the stories from our members, it's about putting tools in their hands so that they're ready to defend the work that they're doing around equity. And so that is actually something that we're going to move forward with next year, is trying to provide resources around that. I think too is looking at it from a leadership standpoint, working with your boards, working with the superintendents and their cabinets, giving them skills to really navigate implementing equity and being on the same page with their board and their community. And so building a foundation for them to have equity leadership where they are working with their community, working with their boards, and leading the work throughout the state. And we hope to sort of push that through next year, as well as, and something that Margarita and I are collaborating on constantly, is putting together some affinity groups for our members, for the members of color, to get together and have dialogue. Our African American members, our Asian Pacific Islander members, our Latino members, giving them the opportunity to dialogue amongst themselves, but also let all of our groups and communities of color and our allies come together to have some conversation about navigating our system. And that's what we're looking at in the next couple of years, certainly in the next year, and hopefully in the future as we push equity moving forward.
Adne, one more question for you, and then we'll get the two of you out of here. Look, Margie just mentioned Superintendent Carvalho and LAUSD, right? And so when you look at the fact that it is important for students to see someone that looks like them, how can we help support that equity work?
Well, I think part of that is influencing what the pipeline looks like for educators of color, right? And that is actually some of the work that I've been doing throughout this year is what does that pipeline look like? How are we as an organization supporting administrators of color and aspiring administrators to move through and navigate our educational system? Even though it's in 2022, if you went and just asked some of our administrators of color, there's still challenges for them to rising to the heights of becoming a superintendent, from being a teacher leader to a vice principal to a principal, moving into the district office, becoming a superintendent. There's still several challenges. And not only that, if you're a woman of color, the numbers and the data really demonstrate that it's even more challenging for you to aspire to lead districts and to lead schools. And so as an organization, we want to put in the supports for that. And that's why Margarita and I collaborate so much together, is we really strive to provide an environment for our members to, one, learn from each other, to learn from those who have been in the profession for a long period of time, and to put them in the rooms together to be able to talk, to mentor each other, to have someone that they can look towards that can support their career moving forward.
Audney Mack, Senior Director of Equity Services, and Margarita Quizan-Armelino, Senior Director of Member Services. We appreciate the time, and Deborah Burke already doing work for me by promoting those two events, the Equity Institute, April 28th and 29th down in Pasadena, and then the Lead with Pride, May 4th through 6th in Oceanside. Shout out to Region 18. Margie, Audney, this was a pleasure. Let's do it again, too.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Michael.
Thank you. Much more coming here on day 2 of the ACSA Legislative Action Days. State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond. He's going to be here at some point. We promise you this. In the meantime, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Naj and Edgar back with Tony Thurmond on the other side. We'll see you in a bit.
Welcome back on day 2 of the 2022 ACSA Legislative Action Days. I'm Naj Alakan, Edgar Zazwata here with us as well, and the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, our good friend Tony Thurmond, joining us here. Tony, so great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me back. Great to see you all.
Hey, let me ask you this. It goes without saying that we're coming off a very difficult period for California public schools. Give us your state of education here in California as it stands right now.
Yeah. As you point out, tough 2 years. If you put it in context with 900,000 Americans having lost their lives to COVID, by our count, some 140,000 children have lost a caregiver. And so difficult times, spike in hate. At least 20 of our counties have experienced wildfire during the pandemic, all difficult challenges for our families. Our communities went into distance learning where we might have had 1 million students without a computer or access to high-speed internet. We still have families without access to broadband. And so we know that our students have struggled academically. Our test scores show that. But I believe that our students are resilient and that they will recover academically. Now, I think that we have to make our priority first addressing the social emotional learning needs of our kids. And you'll hear us talking about legislation that we think will help us recruit and train 10,000 new counselors. That's SB 1229. And as your legislative action days take place, I hope that you all will speak on this bill and champion this bill because we know that even before the pandemic, California was only able to provide about 1/3 of the needs of counselors. And on the heels of tragedies like what happened in Sacramento this weekend, we know that more counseling programs are needed. Grief counseling, not just because of the pandemic, but also the fires and the natural disasters that our communities have experienced. And so we know that there are tough times ahead, but our students are more than the sum of the circumstances that they've experienced. And our parents have done incredible work. They've been incredible partners. And a big shout out to parents for their resilience and students and their resilience. And all of our educators, teachers and classified staff, administrators, all standing together. This has been tough. I mean, we've gone through everything. We've had to learn how to administer healthcare for an illness that we were not familiar with. And literally, the vaccine came together during the time of the pandemic. We all worked together to provide 3 million rapid COVID tests to our schools for free. Thank you, Edgar, for your work in helping us to do all the coordination that we tried to do between school leaders and employee groups to figure out how to support our kids because they deserve to get an education. Mm-hmm. And, when schools reopened, we could see that kids were really putting in the work and families and educators were putting in the work. Bills like the SB 1229, we think are going to help to offset the trauma that many of our students have experienced. And so by my count, a tough time that we've been through, but we think that there are some ways to build off of these difficult moments and transform public education. And when the time is right, I'd like to share a slide that I think will highlight some of the programs that will help to transform public education in our state.
Mr. Superintendent Tony, thank you first of all for always stepping up, and when we call upon you, you've become a great listener. Obviously, you're a frequent guest of all of our programming, and we just appreciate you just lending that ear and getting that perspective of the challenges and the work that's needed in the field. I'm going to ask for your advice, given your unique perspective as a former legislator. You've been one of the biggest proponents for more education funding. This was your case while you were in the legislature. You've continued that call as state superintendent of public instruction. We've had guests all week long, talking about the fiscal issues, talking about the need. Now, one of the challenges that I think we were confronting is kind of some of the perceptions that schools are getting all this money, right? That we have all this money out there. And so why are you guys talking about money? Why are you talking about fiscal challenges? Given that you've talk to folks over not just over the last 2 years, but over your tenure in the legislature and now state superintendent, what can we do to counteract that? Because I think we have some challenges, and it's not just about dollar amounts. It's not just about we have X amount. It's how those dollars are going to be spent. More to LCFF, more to base. Given your unique role, I mean, where should we go with this? How do we move the needle on this issue?
I think that it's true that in the pandemic, we've seen more dollars coming to schools than we've ever seen before in both state and federal money. And that's been incredible. And that has built these programs that we can use to transform schools and help schools build back better, as the president always says. But the reality is that these are one-time dollars, and schools were struggling even before the pandemic to keep pace with the rising costs of education. And so we can't expect school districts to be able to fill all their positions using one-time dollars at a time when we know that people are leaving the education sector, just like they're leaving other sectors, and finding work elsewhere, and sometimes out of the state. To be honest, we hear people say that they can find jobs in other sectors making more money. And so we've got work to do to really fund education properly. And we're doing this in the face of declining enrollment that really was exacerbated during the pandemic. And I don't know if this is one that you all are talking about in your legislative action days, but we've sponsored SB 830 with Senator Portantino, a bill that will think differently about how California schools are funded, not just based on attendance patterns, but on actual enrollment. With California being maybe one of a half a dozen states in the nation that funds schools based on attendance, and we know that schools lose attendance revenue and lose overall revenue when kids struggle. This is a time for us to have a conversation about changing how we fund our schools. And so I'm proud to support this bill and sponsor this bill, having worked on reducing chronic absenteeism for so many years. I think it's important for us to now give our schools resources, and this bill will not just provide more funding, but will provide more funding to address chronic absenteeism so that we can remove the barriers, get kids back in school, make sure that they're learning, and generate the revenue that's needed to continue to support our schools. Also want to commend Assemblymember Al Mursucci as a bill that would increase the cost of living adjustment and LCFF. We know that our schools have been struggling year after year after year to have enough funding to meet all the costs. There are probably a dozen school districts in the state that have reached the designation of lack of going concern, that they're going to literally run out of money. And I know it's hard for people to think of this at a time when there's so much one-time state and federal money. But again, that's one-time money. And we've got to make sure we properly fund our schools to provide all the operations. If you look at even just what we're going to do around universal meals, it's exciting that we can provide universal meals for every hungry student. But that means that school districts have to be able to upgrade their facilities. That we're dealing with the cost of goods is higher than it's been. Food stuff and food goods are very high, and as we deal with the inflation that's gripping our nation. And so I think that folks who think that the one-time money is enough are underestimating the challenges that our school districts are trying to shoulder, while also balancing a massive staffing shortage that we're, thank you, Edgar and others, that we're working to find ways to address.
What do you believe the California public school system has learned during these last few years, and how can we capitalize on the lessons we've learned?
It's hard because people have a right to be upset about lost time and this notion of learning loss. And it is true that we were working already to close the achievement gap, and the pandemic has exacerbated that. But I don't know that we had any other way. I mean, the pandemic came about. There was no vaccine. We didn't know what this illness was going to mean. We didn't know how to keep people safe. And so, unfortunately, we went into the pandemic without the computers that kids should have had to stay connected. And we all scrambled, all of us together. And we literally provided, billions of dollars for computers and hotspots. By my count, 1 million more computers. My task force on closing the digital divide got internet service providers to provide internet at $10 a month, in some cases for free. But you cannot hotspot your way through these challenges. And so the pandemic showed us where we had gaps in our technology. It showed us where there were disparities, as it relates to closing learning gaps. And we have to build off of that. And if you would, I'd like to share this slide and show the programs that I think are going to help us to transform public education, to recover from the challenges of the pandemic and to build back beyond and better. If it's appropriate, I'd love to share that slide that we call Transforming public schools in our state, because I'd like to get feedback from your members about how we implement these programs, because we know that school leaders have a lot on their plate. Is there a
Tony,
chance?
I think we're trying to get the slide here from your staff here, so we'll filibuster a little bit, and we'll come back to the slide there. So hopefully,
I'm sure Nash has another big question for me, but
Tony, I have so much insider information for you on our favorite topic, so don't you worry. I got plenty to ask.
Hey, Tony, one thing that you touched on that I think is at the heart of what everybody's concerned about is this issue of staffing shortages. And I know you're doing a lot of work. We're all collectively trying to do some work on this front. I mean, what are your early assessments? I mean, there's some bigger systemic issues that go way beyond the pandemic. As we know, this is something we were talking about before COVID-19. But I know you've been bringing a lot of stuff together. You know, what are some insights that you've been able to take away from some of this early work, and any preliminary solutions that you might be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, we created this task force on addressing workforce shortage, because we know that, we are not going to have, if you think about just universal, the transitional kindergarten, we're going to have 10,000 more teachers to provide that wonderful resource. And during the pandemic, we've seen retirements of teachers and classified staff, superintendents and administrators. And so we have work to do to build out our workforce. And we know that ultimately compensation and training are going to be critical to that. And we have to find ways to make it easier for someone who wants to become a teacher, a classified staff person to do that. And so that's why we created this workforce. We brought in the Labor Department to kind of give us some data on where people were going. And the reality is that many have left our state during the pandemic. If you look at employment trends, many folks have left California, the high cost of living, when they're able to work in other states. They were able to work remotely in other states, and so they've gone to other states. We hear from some of our classified staff who say that, their members can get jobs working in the fast food sector and earn better wages. And so we have a critical competitive challenge facing us about how we fund public education to retain our workforce and to attract new folks. And this is not unique, by the way, to California education. Every single workforce in the nation has seen decline as people have moved away from job centers. And so we have big work to do when we think about compensation and training. But California also has some great resources to help build that workforce. We have over $500 million in scholarships that can be offered for someone who wants to become a teacher. We have dollars specifically for classified staff who also want to become a classroom teacher. Some $350 million in residency programs that can help us diversify our workforce. And so we just have to figure out a way to put all these together. We need a kind of recruitment campaign on how to, excite folks about wanting to be in this great profession. Some build your own programs. There are resources that are here, but we have to put it all together. And we have to figure out how we provide the resources to our districts to increase salary across the table for all their employees, to make our schools competitive at a time when every sector in our nation is seeing a workforce shortage.
Tony, I'm not going to let Naj talk. He already talks too much anyway, so I'm just gonna steal his thunder here. I'm going to ask you a follow-up. Ask you a follow-up from Jessica Riley. It's about the bill that you mentioned earlier about the development of counselors. So one of the things she notes is that there's a shortage everywhere. You know, the private sector has shortage of therapists as well. So how do we ensure that some of these folks end up in our public schools, where there may be a draw in other industries as well? Every industry really is facing with some of these human capital challenges. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. I think the bill is very straightforward in that it recognizes that we can provide a scholarship of $25,000 to anyone who's an aspiring clinician. Someone's going to become get a master's in social work, or master's in counseling, master's in psychology. And the bill requires that to be a candidate to receive the grant, that someone would have to commit to spending 2 years working in a school setting and in schools of high need. And an example of high need are our rural communities, where we've been struggling to provide mental health resources for many, many years, long before the pandemic. And when you think about all the counties that had fires, people lost a school, a home, a family member. We haven't had access to the grief counselors. And so, and that's why we're pleased to do this, carry this legislation with a great senator, the majority leader in the Senate, Senator McGuire, who represents rural communities, who's been a champion for expanding mental health into rural communities. And so this bill recognizes that many of our urban centers have had the majority of the counselors. By some estimates, even before the pandemic, California was only able to provide about a third of the need for counselors in our state. And so we believe that SB 1229 is exactly the way to make sure that we can provide mental health clinicians in all the places that they're needed in the state over the course of the next couple of years. We have to build out the pipeline so that we have the workforce to do the work that we know is so needed.
Hey, Tony, I'm getting some information from my staff behind the scenes that we do have that slide. If you want to maybe talk to it.
Yeah, as you both have asked, what have we learned from the pandemic? We see the gaps, and these are programs that we are leading at the Department of Education to help fill those gaps and to help us not just recover academically, but help our kids thrive. And we're grateful to our partners in the legislature and the governor for funding these programs in last year's budget as we continue to work on them. I mentioned the universal meals, that every hungry child can have a meal, 2 meals per day. Universal preschool, it's a game changer. Transitional kindergarten, or whether it's state preschool programs or Head Start, that we can provide preschool for every 4-year-old in our state. We know that our youngest learners were impacted in the deepest ways by the pandemic. And so these are incredible programs, expanded learning programs. The dollars that are there for before and after school programs allows us to have a longer school day to address learning loss and promote learning recovery. The governor has built this mental health initiative, the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative, $4.3 billion for children from birth to 25, so that there's no wrong door, to strengthen and fill gaps that might exist, to strengthen the system and fill the gaps so that children getting mental health at school, whether they have Medi-Cal or private health insurance, can do that. Of course, the Community Schools Initiative, a $3 billion strategy that we're implementing right now to provide wraparound supports, mental health, social services, health services, what I call ending the school to prison pipeline type transformative services, $10 million in anti-racism work, and our educator effectiveness grants, billions to support our educators, to support our students. We believe that these are the resources that can help transform California schools. But again, we want to hear from your members about how these programs get implemented, because we know that you can't just push a bunch of resources down from the state level to the school level without getting good impact from those who are implementing it on the school level. So this is what we hope to really help change the face of education in California as we move forward out of the pandemic.
Hey, I just want to let our folks know, for those of you who watch our normally scheduled Wednesday show, Tony and I share an affinity for the Philly cheesesteak. Tony, I just have to let you know that at our ACSA Superintendent Symposium back in February, there was a group from Pennsylvania there, and I had an entire conversation with them about you and I and our affinity for this type of sandwich. They gave me insider information that does not include anything from Jim's or Pat's. So I'm going to send you an email later on today for your next trip to Pennsylvania. I got the insider information for you.
Got it. I'll take it. And I know that it's probably not the best thing to eat in terms of health, but if everything in moderation, as one once said, everything in moderation. And hopefully they're telling you the places where you can get the bread that is shipped from Pennsylvania to California to make those great cheesesteaks.
They gave me the whole rundown. I'm going to Pennsylvania first week of May. I'll get you a rundown of that. State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond. Tony, honored to have you here with us at ACSA Legislative Action Days. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Great to see you, Naj and Edgar. And let's find some time to talk about these bills. Hopefully, the things your members are talking about are resonating. And let me just say thank you to all of your members, the superintendents and the administrators and the staff who are doing the hard work I know you don't get enough thanks. And so thank you for what you're doing. And thank you, President Hoffman and Vice President Potter and Superintendent Amadi, who's often talking with me about issues. And anything that we can do, call on us, and we're happy to support you all as we go together in this work.
Hey, thanks, Tony, very much. Thanks for joining us today. Folks, we're going to take a 45-second break. Don't go anywhere. Right after that, Brooks Allen, Dr. Seud will join us. 45 seconds from now, take a bit of a breather. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Day 2 of the ACSA Legislative Action Days. We are joined right now by Brooks Allen, Education Policy Advisor to Governor Newsom, and the Executive Director, State Board of Education, and Dr. Seud, Safe Schools for All. Great to have both of you here. I'm going to have both of you respond, and Dr. Seud, I'll have you respond first. How have schools helped the state of California realize the positive health outcomes and trends, with California being a leader in many aspects of the different phases of the pandemic and how we've confronted the challenges of the pandemic?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Good to see you, Edgar and Naj, and hope everyone is doing well. Let me maybe just start by underscoring some of those results that you just mentioned. If you account for the size of California, and so you look at the numbers per capita, California has really led the way in terms of comparable states, in terms of averting overall deaths, in terms of keeping kids out of hospitals, in terms of disruptions to in-person learning. All of those are much lower than comparable states and what you might expect overall. So, I think we've done a good job keeping kids in school and out of hospitals and effectively mitigated spread. But to your question of in terms of how, I think in part that's really a testament to your membership and the audience here. It's been local leadership at every single school, all of those conversations that everyone is having with their community in terms of following the guidance and working with folks to ensure that the safety is at the forefront of the conversation. From my vantage, I can speak a little bit more toward the relationship that's been built between health and education, and I think that partnership as well has been fundamental. It's what we've strive to do is really craft policies with the goal of being health protective, but also operationally feasible. And we know that's been far from perfect, but in part, that's why California's blazed its own path, why we're listening and why we're working together, and why we're leaning in with as many supports as is possible. So thinking about testing supports, vaccination supports, ventilation guidance, technical assistance. I'm happy to go on about some of the state resources there, but overall, it's really been, I think, the collaboration and the hard work of all of your members.
And Brooks, your thoughts?
I think Dr. Seud really hits on the key points. I think it has really come down to, and I was actually talking to a group earlier this morning about building those local relationships and then those local state relationships. And those have been so critical. And so where we had folks that already had well-established working relationships between, say, County Office of Ed and County Health, and then how that really worked closely with districts, they were able to kind of get up and running a little faster. And those during the pandemic were able to really establish those relationships. It became really critical. And then really having those entities working with their state partners, I think we've seen a great deal of success. And I think we've seen really promising patterns and relationships being established for how we work moving forward. And so whether we tackle some of the crises that face us right now around student mental health, staff mental health, as well as obviously continue to combat COVID-19 and other health issues, I think those are going to be the types of things that we can continue to build on.
Dr. Seud, Brooks, first of all, let me just express some gratitude, some thanks. You both have been good partners over this, this difficult stretch. And we know, and, our members are not shy, and they often told you when they didn't agree with certain aspects about policies and whatnot. But I think the number one thing that everybody acknowledges is that relationship, that partnership, you helping us to anticipate what things that were coming down the pipeline and prepare the best we could. Brooks, I'm going to ask you a question first. And obviously, getting way beyond just COVID-19, you as a representative of the administration, you know, now that we're entering kind of this endemic period and thinking big picture, just big picture priorities for the administration as it relates to education, kind of where are we at, both on the COVID side, but then just on the broader investments, where the governor sees things going here as we're entering, hopefully, this most promising period.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Edgar. I think so much of when we think about what has been the recent conversation, we also think about when the governor first came into office and announced his very first budget. Right? One of the things he talked about, top slides, Dr. Darlene Hammond slides about teacher workforce, staff workforce, and talked about the challenges of trying to deal with what we know to be the issues of both building that pipeline, recruitment, retention, and those are issues that are even put in more stark relief given where we stand today, and obviously the stresses and just frankly the burnout that so many have experienced across all sectors, but particularly in our schools where students, staff, families, administrators who've stepped into a million different roles and done everything from serving lunches to mowing lawns to teaching classrooms to also handling their duties and figuring out the finances. There's deep challenges, right, in terms of how do we make this a profession that folks want to join and want to stay in and see as a long-term promise. And so one of the things that the governor has been touting since his very first day, as well as through now, is how do we make public education deliver upon that promise for all and for all California families and all California students? What's that value proposition in terms of what public schools can provide? And that's why, some of the themes that I know the state superintendent was just touching upon in your earlier conversation remain so critical. Even though with the pandemic, some of the nature of the conversations have changed, it still continues to be the case that we need to serve our children as early as possible. We need to provide opportunities for those kinds of wraparound services within the school day, throughout the day, and not only just from pre-K, P3, all the way through college and career, but with a real focus on treating the whole child and meeting their needs. And that's as important as ever, given where we stand today.
Dr. Seud, what should, actually, before I ask you this question, folks, if you do have questions for Dr. Seud or for Brooks, go ahead and put those into our chat, our comments section. We've got some time that we can pass along some of those questions. All right, Dr. Seud, what should schools expect as we move from pandemic to endemic?
Well, I'll start by saying I hesitate to use the word endemic. I think it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There are many communicable diseases out there that are endemic and cause tremendous amount of devastation in this world. So as we think about this next phase and this transition forward, I think what we're hoping to do is continue a staged approach, moving away from some of the blunt measures that were appropriate in the beginning when we didn't quite know what was upon us, to more targeted interventions. And that's why you don't hear, California really talking about closures, even about physical distancing. And as of tomorrow, as our guidance changes at that point in time, we're going to talk less and less about quarantine as well. So I think we've learned a lot. We have to remain humble, but as we look ahead, we have to be dynamic. We have to, be able to flex up and down depending on what's in front of us. We have to be proportional. The kitchen sink approach, as I mentioned, was appropriate in the beginning, but now, particularly as we continue to recognize the sheer importance and fundamental priority of in-person instruction, we have to recognize the importance of doing what is necessary to keep kids safe and the risk low, but not necessarily significantly more than that. We have to focus on vigilance and prevention, meaning thinking about vaccines and indoor air quality to keep the virus out of our bodies and out of our air. And we have to think about how to be generalizable. So as we move beyond COVID, how might some of the interventions that we put in place help other components of child health as well? If focusing on indoor air quality wipes out asthma, let's do it. If some of the mental health supports that we put in place bring kids to a better place more generally, let's focus on that. If thinking about symptoms and masks differently has helped wipe out flu and other communicable diseases, let's continue to think about that. all the while ensuring a focus on equity too.
Dr. Seud, Brooks, I'll ask you both this, and I'm actually surprised that our members haven't jumped in and asked this question because I feel I get this question almost every single week, and you'll probably anticipate it. So kind of two-part. If you could kind of give us an update on where we're at on the governor's efforts on two things. One is the student vaccine requirement, and notwithstanding what's happening in the legislature, but the governor, late last year made an announcement. So maybe if you just give us an update on what's happening on that front. And then two, the question we seem to be getting all the time is, do we anticipate any changes to the current rules for employees of vaccinator tests? We see some changes happening in other industries and other sectors. Anything change on our landscape? So I'll go to you, Dr. Seud, first, but feel free to toss it back to Brooks if necessary.
Sure. I'll take the vaccine mandate, and then Brooks, if you want to discuss the vaccine or test order, that's fine too. With regard to the vaccine mandate, as the governor announced back in October, really the trigger for initiating that is full FDA licensure for the vaccine for a span of grades that includes those as young as 12 or in 7th grade. And as of this point in time, that has yet to happen. The FDA has a number of items on the docket forthcoming, which includes vaccines, looking through EUA for vaccines for the ages of younger than 5, looking at full licensure for those 12 and above, looking at various booster components. So a number of different things on their plate. But that would be the initial trigger to start the process. And so that is yet to occur. Preparations are underway, but we'll have to see how this process plays out. We want to ensure the safety, the efficacy, and necessity of the vaccine is communicated well. But again, this is a process that involves some collaboration and some lead from the federal authorities to initiate that.
And building on that, I would just say with respect to the questions, and Edgar, you're right. We get that question on nearly a daily basis, as I know as you do as well. We'll continue to provide an update as soon as there is one to provide. At this point in time, there is no change, and there's nothing to share in terms of anticipated change. But as the governor has articulated so many times, one of the things that we've learned with COVID is that things can shift. We remain humble. And we know that we'll provide update with as much lead time as possible with respect to any changes that might be coming down the pike.
Let me ask both of you. Michelle Borges from Region 13, the principal over at Santa Ynez Union High School District, asked this question. Is there a plan to support schools in shifting our staff and leaders back to the work of teaching and learning? Brooks, I'll have you chime in on that. Dr. Seud, I'll have you chime in on Michelle's question.
Yeah, and I will toss part of this to Dr. Seud because it's a conversation that we have had. In fact, I've had the pleasure of speaking with a number of your members in some regional settings and some county-based settings about this very question. And I will say, I believe Michelle is probably referring to the fact that so many staff have had to take time to do the work around any number of issues, but certainly contact tracing, worrying about issues of both administering tests, and so many of the COVID protocols, and the time and energy that has taken, and the energy that has taken away from the classroom. And that is something that already, hopefully, folks have seen in the shifts in the guidance, as Dr. Seud referred to, that have really aimed to move more and more of that into a space that can be handled outside of school personnel as appropriate, while still recognizing that there will always be some appropriate health and safety role for some school staff. But even when we get to issues of testing and looking at how we handle issues around tracing with the group tracing protocol, there have been significant shifts to try to alleviate that burden to the full extent possible, and then look forward to a future in where that burden is lessened and lessened as quickly as possible. And with that, I'll toss it to Dr. Seud.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Michelle. And just kind of extending from what Brooks was just mentioning, I recognize and agree with the sentiment. I feel the same for the staff and the teachers working with my children in the public schools too. I hope it doesn't necessarily mean going back to exactly the way things were. Right, we've learned a lot from this process and these really intense past 2 years that we can use to build programs better as we move forward. Thinking about communication, thinking about mental health, thinking about health outcomes. So all of those pieces I think are important. And we have to be humble, as has been mentioned, play with the cards that we're dealt. we're certainly in a better spot than we were really at many other points in the pandemic. But on average, throughout this week, every day, 50 people are dying from COVID-19 in the state of California. So I'm right there with you. And I hope we can put this pot of COVID on the back burner and do so in a phased manner that continues to ensure the safety of all. But it will be a staged process to ensure that the health is still an important consideration when thinking about the safety of our children.
Dr. Seud, I'll ask you a follow-up that came from Scott, and I think he was responding to what you were talking about in terms of the governor's initiative on the vaccines and authorization. So he asked, is emergency authorization vaccines appropriate right now, given the stage that we're in? I know this gets confusing because, as you pointed out, the governor, some of this is contingent on full authorization. I know there's some other efforts out there that don't have the same criteria, but just for clarity's sake, if you could just repeat that in terms of what are the triggers that would have to be set off to move to the next phase.
Sure. So currently, the Pfizer vaccine is really the only vaccine that's eligible for the majority of the school's population. And that is currently, through the FDA, granted emergency use authorization, meaning in these unprecedented times, it's been an expedited review process to ensure the safety and health of the population. That has been the process to get things going. The FDA then continues to review the data around the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine moving forward, and provides, after that first stage, a second stage, which is full licensure or full FDA approval of that vaccine. That is based, again, on a summation of an extensive review process, and that is what's anticipated to be coming soon for those between the ages of 12 and 15. It has already occurred for those over the age of 16 into adulthood, but has yet to occur for that younger ages, which again received emergency use authorization later in the process than the adult populations. So it's an ongoing iterative process, and the governor has linked that process to the announcement of moving forward with a vaccine mandate in schools, meaning that full FDA process needs to occur. It needs to be granted full licensure or full FDA approval. Procedures to occur.
You're on mute, Naj.
Some of you are like just a moment ago where I was quiet. Some of you guys really quiet on the comment section. Go ahead. Don't forget to drop in your questions and comments into our comment section for Brooks and for Dr. Seud.
Hey, Brooks, I'm going to throw another question at you that I know you're not going to be a stranger to, because you hear the sentiment a lot on two fronts. This whole notion, one of the pieces has come across that the state was pretty aggressive, doing some ambitious things in the last couple of years with new programs, with expanded learning opportunity grant, with universal transitional kindergarten, and really having there be a need now. And this is something we're hearing from our members, for discretionary funding to really double down on some of the investments, some of the commitments we've already made. So I'll have you react to that. And then somewhat related, I know Scott, and this came up, I think, in the conversation with the superintendent about this whole notion of no more plans, please, that their people are overwhelmed with the amount of plans that are coming from the state. I know in your role as the executive director of state board, oftentimes you folks are just implementing, directives from the legislature, but maybe you could touch on that. And if that's something that at least the administration is sensitive to.
Yeah, I think extraordinarily sensitive to it, Edgar. And you're right. I mean, it's been a constant theme of the budget conversations throughout this season. And I think, what I have been heartened by is I think that there's also been a lot of shared consensus that's important to continue to build on those pre-existing investments, and the ones that you've talked about in terms of the expansion of universal transitional kindergarten, a commitment to universal meals, a commitment to ensuring that all children, regardless of where they live in the state, have access to after-school enrichment activities, not just those that have access to family resources to be able to do those types of activities, and that those are important to continue to roll out and implement. And yet doing so with the sensitivity to both the planning issue that you raise, but also the issue that comes up around, and I think hopefully you saw that with the governor's proposals in January in the trailer bill, about looking where if you can't go to full implementation right away, that a proportional ramp up in some of those programs can be appropriate, and in fact, the best way to go given where we are right now. But fundamentally, it also is about demonstrating that a commitment to meeting the needs of every child in a way that reaches kind of around not only just kind of those community relationships that we talked about earlier, but reaches all of their needs, has to be part of the value proposition, part of the promise that California is making to families and school children as folks look to say, you know, what is the value proposition of our public schools right now? What is that promise that we can deliver on in a way that is focused on equity and yet is still cognizant of and really lifts up the importance of continued local control to craft programs that are responsive to local needs and local circumstances, but not to the extent that it forgets the fact that every child, no matter where they live, does deserve some of those same fundamental opportunities. So we're hearing, I think everyone continues to hear and try to be responsive to the need to build up and be responsive to where folks are right now, while still really continuing to maintain the progress that we're making on those critical fronts in terms of ensuring equal opportunity for all students.
Brooks, Rob Martinez puts in this question. Are there ways that you would suggest we can align our focus to increase LCFF, help us return more students to school and return educators to educating? What would you say to Rob?
Rob, I think if I understand the question correctly, I think a lot of this it hopefully touches on my last answer a bit, which is when we're talking about what it means to get families back into schools, back understanding the importance and the critical opportunities that come with public schools. We've seen, I mean, early studies have shown that expanding, for instance, to provide transitional kindergarten can be very attractive to parents and lead to actually fewer needs later in the grade span as the students' needs are met early, and early interventions have the intended effect. And so the more that we do that, the more that you see, and as the governor's proposed around literacy coaches to address literacy issues in the earliest grades and those early interventions, those are going to be really critical to demonstrating the value and the importance of our public schools and bringing people back and keeping our families in our public schools. As far as the profession, I think that too. I think continuing to honor our educators, honor our administrators through investments and through the commitments that are made to meeting those needs, that's going to be the way that we continue to build our public schools.
Dr. Seud, one last question for you. I mean, you and your team and the broader CDPH team at the state have been good about giving us some perspective about what things may come. And I know it's when we're talking about COVID and forecasting, it's not an easy thing to do. But just given that we're seeing more headlines here about subvariant, we're seeing kind of what's happening in Europe. You know, what's the latest thinking on this? And as we're entering, we know what happened last summer. We know we're coming off of spring break. So what are you folks seeing, and what do you think this will mean for our education sector?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, I believe you're referring to the Omicron subvariant known as BA.2, which is certainly, among the more predominant variants globally at this point in time. We are tracking what's happening in Asia, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the northeast of the United States very closely, and seeing what the implications of that might be for the state of California. Each of those situations has a much different context behind it. So, I don't think at this point in time we're really anticipating some of the unfortunate tragedies that are occurring in many parts of East Asia right now to end up at our borders. And that's in part because of really what we've already gone through. We went through a tremendous surge during the Omicron period of time, and that has caused a lot of infection-induced immunity. And at the same time, we've done a really good job in the state of California getting vaccines into the arms of those who are eligible. Absolutely more work to be done, but that has saved lives. And the combination of those two forms of immunity going forward, we're hoping are going to weather this emerging predominance of BA.2. And in terms of the data around that statewide, we overall cases continue to drop, although more recently at a little bit of a slower rate. And within that drop, though, the proportion of cases that are related to this new subvariant are increasing. And increasingly now, the majority of cases are the BA.2 variant. So it actually overall, that picture bodes fairly well that even though that proportion is increasing, the total number of cases continues to drop. And so, I would say cautiously optimistic, but continuing to monitor the situation very closely. And then, to the bigger points of what you just mentioned, Edgar, that's very true. We have to be careful when prognosticating beyond weeks or months, because things can change quite dramatically. This was a lull last year as well. It's when I actually took the job over here at the state, assuming we would coast out this school year, and lo and behold, things changed quite dramatically. So we're going to continue to be vigilant and ensure the safety and success of schools.
Let me ask one final question for both of you, and Brooks, I'll have you start. We're about 2 to 3 months away from the end of this school year, this academic year, depending on what district you're at. In 30 seconds, what would your message be to school leaders as we continue to progress through the spring and into the next academic year?
I just think there's no way you start or end any message without starting with gratitude. I think a real gratitude on behalf of not only those of us with our kids in those schools, with my 8th grader and 6th grader. In fact, I just had a meeting where we had our local superintendent and county superintendent about that. But a gratitude for ensuring that we navigate these incredibly difficult times, both with respect to COVID, as well as the other challenges that we're seeing that lead into some of the school discussions, whether they have to do with curriculum, funding, the very promise of what public schools represent. It's an incredibly important time. And I think that in terms of these next steps, we see a lot of promise. I am encouraged that we are at a point where we can talk about new investment and not be talking about cuts in the midst of these same challenges. And I think that that's the promise that lies ahead. So a deep, deep gratitude for navigating everything that we have over the past couple of years, and a real hope for joining hands and looking forward to the promise that is not only just comes with spring, but also looking to the next school year, and encouraging folks to continue to think about those summer opportunities that can be provided, to lean in with some of the resources that are being provided to help students who may need to do a little bit of learning acceleration, additional supports to ensure that they are prepared for next fall. And just thank you, everybody, and thank you to all your members.
And Dr. Seud, your message to our school leaders.
Oh, very much the same. Tremendous gratitude and appreciation for the hard work and efforts. I feel blessed to live in this state, to be surrounded by this team, to have my kids go to schools here in California. And so, building on that theme of gratitude, I hope that as our students enter spring breaks, that our staff and everyone on this call gets a bit of respite as well. I think we've learned a lot, and we've gotten there together, and we've incrementally become more adept at this. And so, agree that the ongoing collaboration is how we're going to continue to get through all of this.
Brooks Allen, Education Policy Advisor to Governor Newsom and Executive Director, State Board of Education, Dr. Seud from the Safe Schools for All. Gentlemen, it's been great having you here. You are always welcome back. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Great to see you both. Take care all.
Thank you.
Likewise.
All right, folks, we are going to take a couple of minutes break here. And then when we come back, we will have Eileen Strauss, Dr. Francisco Escobedo join us. That's 3 minutes away. Edgar, we will bring you back here. This is day 2 of the 2022 ACSA Legislative Action Days. And welcome back. Day 2, ACSA Legislative Action Days. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. We're so happy you've been with us today. We've got a little less than one more hour coming up. In just a couple of moments, Dr. Francisco Escobedo, member of the State Board of Education, Eileen Strauss, former vice president for the State Board of Education. They will both be joining us. Just a little teaser for you, because Edgar, you like to make sure that you give me a hard time every time I promote our Wednesday show. Too bad, I'm going to go ahead and do it again. Coming up tomorrow, 1 p.m. on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. We will have State Senator John Laird as our guest. We've got plenty to talk to the senator about. That is coming up on 1 p.m. on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. And of course, if you're on YouTube, you can subscribe on our YouTube page. You can get updated information when we're going to have a live broadcast. Of course, we have our regularly scheduled 1 p.m.
Hey, Naj, if you didn't promote, we'd be talking to ourselves on Wednesday. So I shouldn't give you a hard time, right? There's only so much you and I can go back and forth. So what makes this work is when we do get something. So I'll give you a break. Thank
you. I mean, look, after tomorrow's show, 3 days of you and me being in the anchor seats, you and I are going to be sick of each other. We're going to need a little time away from each other.
Let me say one piece on this next topic, because I know we're hitting the stretch run, and I really do appreciate everybody that stayed with us or have come in and out as they're conducting their visits or doing their advocacy visits. But this is a new piece for us, where one of the pieces that sometimes gets overlooked, and we'll get into this with our guest, is the State Board of Education. That it's this entity that has a really important role in our state. Doesn't get as much publicity oftentimes as the legislature or the governor, but some of the policies, I would actually say, that directly impact our schools come from this body. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and two of our ACSA leaders that have been in these very prominent spots.
Yeah, let's go ahead and bring in our guests, because we're honored to have them today. Eileen Strauss, former vice president for the State Board of Education, and Dr. Francisco Escobedo, member of the State Board of Education. Again, honored to have both of you here on our ACSA 2022 Legislative Action Days. Welcome. Eileen, let me go ahead and start with you. During your tenure on the State Board, do you think the makeup of the board was a major factor in some of the actions that were taken impacting California public schools?
So actually, a simple answer is yes. I mean, I was on the state board for 11 years, and we had a very diverse board with a lot of variety of backgrounds. And I believe that each of the board members came to the board work thoughtful, deliberated. You might remember we had a lot of deliberation, a lot of comments, but I think the balance of voices on the board, teacher, practitioner, policymaker, professor, I think researcher really helped bring the results that we hoped for, but it was a very collaborative but diverse board.
Francisco, thank you for joining us, and congratulations on this. I know it all feels like it's been a long time, I'm sure, for you now, but still relatively new to the state board, and we were all very excited when you got appointed because of your portfolio, like Eileen, because of your background, that you were going to be a voice to our members, to those practitioners who have been in the trenches. So give us your early impressions. As Naj and Eileen talked about, there's been some changes. The makeup of the board looks somewhat different now. Here in your early tenure, what's been your experience? And then we'll get into some of the emergent issues that are coming before the board.
Well, as you know, I've been in 11 years as a superintendent and retired back in September. So been in this position since then. And my earliest impressions is that we have a dedicated group of CDE staff members that truly are there to do the right thing for kids. And that's been very obvious in all my encounters, from Chief of Staff Brooks Allen to all his staff members, to it's been an amazing experience. Dr. Darling Hammond has just been a champion in education for so many years, and having her as president is significant. So my early impressions is like, I'm very impressed with this group, and yes, we're going through a significant change. Eileen, who's you heard was been there for 11 years. We're losing a significant amount of institutional knowledge. The great thing is I still am in contact with Eileen. In fact, we had lunch just last week and trying to capture all of that. The past is so critical. The past, it really grounds you on where you were, and so we can pave a better present, create a better present, and pave a better future as well. So definitely want to make sure that I still am connected to the people that just left the board.
Want to remind all of you here in our 11 o'clock hour, if you have questions or comments for Eileen or Francisco, go ahead and put those into our chat. We'll address those a little bit later on here in this segment. Francisco, let me ask you, with being fairly new to the board, what are your goals? What can we kind of picture as your lens of things and how you want to move forward with your goals?
Well, one of my goals definitely is to provide a lens from the superintendency lens and the site principals lens. I think that's really critical, that I'm able to bring out the voice of leadership throughout our state. And one of the things that I know one of my goals is I have a cadre of superintendents that I'm still very connected with. Also, my work through the National Center of Urban School Transformation. My goal is to bring in those in real important aspects of what enhances school districts that serve students of color, and whatever I can to make sure that there's equity and excellence at every single school in the state through the work we do at the State Board of Education. Really, that is my primary goal.
Hey, Eileen, it goes without saying that your 11 years on the board were significant. I mean, I just think about all the different issues that were taken up, from the development of LCFF to our system of support, or changes to the accountability system. We could go on and on and on. It seems like even more than 11 years, right? So just a little bit of reflection on that piece. I'll just tie in what one of our leaders, Holly said. You've been a champion. Arguably, you were the voice. Anytime our members had perspectives, you were our biggest cheerleader to make sure we were bringing that perspective. Now, as you sit back and kind of take stock, what do you think were the biggest accomplishments or the biggest developments over your time on the state board?
So I would say, Edgar, so obviously in 11 years, it wasn't a single thing, and you listed some. So I would reflect on a couple of really key areas. I just think it was a really important policy time. The governor, the board president, the advocacy groups, we were all together and needing to really rethink the whole system. So I think a couple of things. One, the English language arts, English language development framework, which was the first time we brought English language development right into the connection in classrooms for teachers to think about, to scaffold the work in literacy for all students, since more than 90% of teachers have English learners in their classrooms in California. So that was one that is still, I think, 1,200 pages of an important guidance document for the field to use and guide strong literacy instruction, which is a key priority of Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, our board president, and the state superintendent, Tony Thurmond. The second thing, the next generation science standards and the science framework was the first time we upgraded science standards in 20 years. And we know a lot more about science now than we used to. And so the fact that we were able to, it's not fully implemented yet. I think the pandemic got in the middle of districts. It stopped districts in their adoption process. But thinking about science moving forward, I think was an incredible, wonderful process to be part of with the science leaders in our state. And then finally, Edgar, I think what you said is the whole system. I mean, when Mike Kirst was leaving the board, he said, like, we did everything. We did standards, we did frameworks, we did assessment, accountability. I mean, the whole system was revamped over the 11 years that I've been on the board. And really, I think the multiple measures for accountability align to the federal system, so it's not two separate systems. But I think really now, as I look forward, we have such a strong groundwork, and we need to continue working on the implementation of the programs and the materials and the guidance that we did develop.
All right, there have been some interesting topics on the board before the state board. Let's talk math framework, Francisco. What is your perspective on the math framework?
Well, as you saw, some guidelines have been revamped and added to the math framework, and I know it's a guide, not a mandate. But however, when you look at our student achievement in the area of math, is a definite pain point in California. Our students aren't achieving where they should be, and it's my understanding the framework. That's a focus, is how do you create equity so that all students can achieve well while maintaining excellence and high rigorous standards. And I believe the framework is attempting to do that, is attempting to create an environment where math can be taught in a very relevant way that's focused on building, focus on constructivist type of aspects that would help all students learn and understand math, right? It takes you away from that drill and kill and creates application to real life problems. So it is my hope that the framework will enlighten our state, and we should hopefully, as a result of the implementation of the framework, enhance student achievement in the area of math, because it is sorely needed in the state of California.
I'll have you both touch on a question we got from Scott Borba, who actually I would say I think has been consistently a champion and bringing up these issues for some of the smallest districts in the state. And I think both of you would have some perspective here. He points out that the nearly 1/3 of our districts have less than 5,000 students. And I know this is a bigger policy question that we ask the folks in the legislature. How do we make sure that their voices are adequately represented, given some of their unique needs? From the state board perspective, what are your thoughts here? One, is there an appreciation for some of your unique needs? And maybe you could give them some advice on how do we maybe elevate their voice and their perspective as the state board is making decisions. Eileen, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so let me just say there's several different avenues to get the voice clear in front of the state board. One, clearly testimony in front of our meetings. And actually during Zoom, it's been remote, and it's given a lot of people access to hearing their voices. And then writing letters as well. I mean, we read those and we review them and we take in the information. And then also the advocacy groups have been really meeting with our state board and CDE team to share concerns that are different, say, of a district of 500 versus a district of 200,000. And so I just think we need to use the avenues that are available and making sure that board members, we represent, we care about their voices and the implications. And again, we're a very, very diverse state, but I agree with so many districts that are small, we need to make sure that we understand the impact of the decisions that are being made on districts of all different sizes and all different contexts as well. So I would just say using the testimony public, using the written, and working with their advocacy groups really make sure that the board members hear their voices.
Francisco, your take on this?
Yeah, I would like to just add on what Eileen said, because everything she said is right on. But I would say, hey, join ACSA. And I know that you're broadcasting it, but yeah, join ACSA, because I know while I was superintendent, it was really important that the small districts had a voice. They should not be shadowed by the larger districts. And so being part of ACSA, having an ACSA representative within your superintendent group, and ensuring that your voice is represented through that representative is very, very critical. So I think ACSA is a huge, powerful advocacy group that I believe small districts need to leverage to ensure that their needs are expressed, and also their needs are expressed to us as well. I'm part of a superintendent's group in Southern California, and there's an ACSA representative, and sometimes it's you, Edgar, and definitely hear your voice through different venues.
Francisco, I have to tell you, your Why ACSA promotion right there. I swear I could hear the staff running up and down to get ready to put together a meme.
We didn't even pay for that. That was
yeah. So thank you for that. Eileen, let me ask you about what has seemed over time to be, a controversial subject. Last year you had to manage the ethnic studies framework. How was that?
Well, it was challenging for sure. The ethnic studies actually was a model curriculum guide, but clearly generated a huge amount of personal emotion from parents, from teachers, from leaders, from advocacy groups. And it took us several years. I think we ended up with more than 100,000 comments over the process of completing the model curriculum. But let me just say, I think the process really worked. We had input sessions from lots of different groups. We listened, and I believe the process allowed us to find the through line. Again, the model curriculum for ethnic studies is a guidance document that the state worked very hard to develop and to give a lot of resources, but it will still be local districts that will have to develop their own courses using some of these resources to help them. But their local districts will be the course that gets developed. But let me just say, it was definitely challenging and important, I think, to everyone. And again, Dolores Huerta came forward, Shirley Weber came forward, Senator Ben Allen came forward. We had a lot of voices helping us navigate this and to come to the process to complete the adoption of the model curriculum for ethnic studies.
I have one more question for both of you. I know we've been talking, and it's hard. It almost feels over the last 2 years to think about anything before COVID or even anything after COVID, right? Like, we're all living in the present. But I think we are now at least in a moment where we can start looking ahead. One of the themes of our advocacy day is how do we get our educators back to some of the core functions of schools, right? Which is teaching and learning. We've all been in crisis mode. How do we get to some of those core functions? So I'd be curious of both of your perspectives of what do you see as the emerging issues moving forward, whether it be before the state board or just from a policy standpoint or a practice standpoint moving forward. And what from your vantage point, what should our educators be thinking about? I'll start with Francisco.
I think the staffing crisis is huge. I think we have to figure out a way, policy-wise, to make teaching an attractive career to pursue, and we have to really figure out different ways of attracting, and maybe different ways. We've learned a lot through the pandemic. I mean, there's been a lot of innovative practices that occurred, and so how do we keep those practices? Obviously. But we need to figure out a way to enhance the teaching profession and also enhance our educator force. It's going to be very critical.
And Eileen?
Well, so let me build on what Francisco said, is that attracting quality, committed individuals who find, just as we all did, that education is a life career passion. But we need to really look at attracting them, compensating them, and looking at the quality of their work setting. I think this is an opportunity for us to rethink how we do some of our professional support in growing new educators and also throughout their career. And I would say, as we support teachers, we also need to support leaders. This is it's helping us realize that it's not just the academics, the social emotional, it's the connection to kids. And I think it's an opportunity as we work with educators and leaders to rethink, what have we learned during the pandemic that will really help us in redefining and improving our educational opportunities for all students in schools. But it's really the people in the classroom and leading the schools that are going to make the difference. So honestly, it's the support, ongoing coaching, collaboration, professional opportunity, and compensation to make it attractive when there's a lot of other opportunities out there to attract young people.
Yeah, very well said. Eileen Strauss, former vice president of the State Board of Education, Dr. Francisco Escobedo from the State Board of Education. Thank you both so much for being with us today. It was an honor to have you here on day 2 of the ACSA 2022 Legislative Action Days. Have a great rest of the day, and we look forward to talking with you next time.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
All right. Let's see, Edgar, we are coming to a close here on day 2 of the ACSA
I
2020.
think did we actually make it, Naj? Did it, like
Woo.
want to do another 4 hours just for kicks? Or
I mean, why not? Let's see. You know what? I'm seeing that we've had some people that have been, some of our members who've been commenting, throughout the day. I don't see any reason why we can't bring Rob Martinez and Scott Borba and Holly Eads, and Michelle Borges. I have no problem. We can bring them on. Why not? Right?
Hey, I appreciate that. Again, there's only so much you and I can talk to each other. So I love when people are jumping in. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's been great. I've really appreciated the involvement throughout the 2 days.
Yeah. 4 of our favorite members. Let me ask you as we wrap up, Edgar, and I'll do my tease for what's coming up in the next week or so. Your thoughts as we wrap up today, as we send our members out to their advocacy meetings over the next few days. Your final thoughts on what we've talked about here over these last 2 days and what we've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, I'd be remiss, and I know there's a big team behind this, Naj, and it goes beyond just the folks that you've seen on the screen. I love that we had some of our other ACSA teammates on board with Michael and Margie and Adene, and there's a whole team behind them. I know your communications team on my government relations team, but just a quick shout out to Suzanne Caffrey, Philip Miranda, Christy Chamorian, just to name a few. You saw our advocates there yesterday. I know that there's just a lot of work has gone into publicizing this, again, to underscore the work of our VPLAs from the respective regions. When you sign up for ACSA leadership positions, they're not all created equal. And our folks can attest to, there's a lot of work that goes into coordinating these meetings, bringing the team together, but it really is at the heart of the success. We get up here, we try to lead folks in the right direction, but it's the work of our individual members that has really been our biggest resource here in our association. So it's the word of the day. It's the word of the last 2 days, but I'm just going to share that. It's a tremendous amount of gratitude for our folks, for the amount of work that they put in, especially in a year where they have more than their hands full.
Yeah.
In terms of reflections, Naj, it's been successful. Again, the common theme, we're hearing the themes that our folks have been talking to us in the last year, in the last 2 years. I love the fact that the legislators are echoing some of those themes. Now we have a responsibility. We need to create some accountability. It's not just going to these meetings today. It's not just going to these meetings for the rest of this week. It's staying on them. When we hear some of the perspectives, we heard a lot of things that were music to our ears from the policymakers. We have to make sure we stay on them. We're going into May revise. We're going into the budget season. Yeah. So I think we're going to see some of those perspectives that they shared. They expressed support for a lot of things that our folks have been asking for. When it all is said and done, are they going to come through on that? And I think that's our job, to stay on them. But all told, I just think this has been a great kickoff to what the 70 meetings that are going to happen in the Capitol. Open invitation. I know we're going to be talking to our Vice President of Legislative Action, but keep us in the loop. Our team is going to be involved in some of these meetings, but if there are things that we need to follow up on, let's create that connection here of the issues that are coming up in the local meetings, and then how us at statewide ACSA can move forward and really close the deal in some of these cases.
Yeah, and I would add just very quickly, Edgar, our ACSA board of directors and especially our ACSA executive board really gives us the opportunity, really sets the stage and the tone for how we move forward with our VPLA. So special thanks out to all of them. Here comes promotion for all of you guys. Join us tomorrow. Edgar's going to put a big smile on his face now because he knew I was going to do this. Coming up tomorrow, live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, 1 p.m. on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Senator John Laird will be with us to talk about what's happening inside the state capitol and with the legislative process. And then April 13th, that is next Wednesday, Dr. Richard Pan, Senator Pan, will be with us to talk about his vaccine proposals and what's happening in the legislative process. So be sure to join us.
I just want to make sure. Sometimes you cut me off, so I'm sorry to jump in there. I just want to get my two pieces there. No, Naj, and sincere thank you to you. I mean, just navigating this through all of this, making it smooth. I don't know what I'd do without you in terms of just getting us in and out with all these guests. And another real special shout out Gianna Miller, who's been one of our producers behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I know she's been navigating, trying to get the guests here and there. And I know you have a whole full team of your communications team with the graphics, with the EdCal. I mean, we could go on and on. Just a lot of big thank yous for making this event a huge success.
Yep, it was a great event. Thank you, folks, so much for being with us here at the 2022 ACSA Legislative Action Days. Enjoy your advocacy meetings. Be sure to join us tomorrow on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube at 1 p.m. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you next time.